Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we're reading Canto 10, Chapter 47, and the text is 34 and 35, and 34 is on the board. So we can chant responsibly. Yatvaham bhavatsi namvai Dure varte priyo drisham manasaha sanikashartam mad anujyana kamyaya yatvaham bhavatsanam vai Dure varte priyo drisham manasa sanikashartam madanujyana kamyayam yatvaham bhavatinam vai Dure yar varte priyo drisham manasaha sanikashartam madanujyana kamyayam. Please chant. Yatvam bhavatinam vai Dure vate priyo drisham manasa sanikashartam madanujyana kamyayam. Yatvaham bhavatinam vai Dure varte priyo drisham manasaha sanikashartam madanujyana kamyaya. Yatvaham bhavitanam vai Dure varte priyo drisham manasaha sanikashartam madanujyana kamyaya. It's the word for word, yat. The fact that to, however, aham, I, bhavatinam, from your, by, indeed, dure, far away, varte, am situated, priya, who am dear, drisham, to the eyes, manasaha, of the mind, sanikarsha, of the attraction, artham, for the sake, mat, upon me, anujyana, for your meditation, kamyaya, out of my desire. And the translation for text 34 is as follows. So this is the message Uddhava is delivering, and this is Krishna's message to the gopis. But the actual reason why I, the beloved object of your sight, have stayed far away from you is that I wanted to intensify your meditation upon me and thus draw your mind closer to me. Purport. Sometimes that which is close to our eyes is far from the heart and mind, and conversely, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Although apparently going far away from the gopis, Lord Krishna was bringing them closer to him on the spiritual platform. And then text 35. Yata durachare preste mana avisya vartate strinam chana tata chetaha sani krishte kshikochare. And the translation for text 35. When her lover is far away, a woman thinks of him more than when he's present before her. The purport. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, the same holds true for men who become more absorbed in thinking of a beloved woman when she is far away than when she is present before their eyes. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurinmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Yuto Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahikam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapsa Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavan Ishvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpataribhya Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Roma Padaswami Iti Namine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I'll read text 34 again as a refresher before I launch off. But the actual reason why I, the beloved object of your sight, have stayed far away from you is that I wanted to intensify your meditation upon me and thus draw your minds closer to me. So drawing upon Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on this verse, he says that the general meaning of Krishna's message is as follows. So I'm quoting him. So this is the message of Krishna, and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, as always, he goes into the deeper inner thought process of the person under discussion. So here it's Krishna's thinking. So quoting, "Thus, I, who am so attractive to your eyes, am now situated far away from them. This is simply out of my desire to increase your meditation on me. By that meditation, your mind is drawn to me. Therefore, I'm very close to your minds." Close quote. So that Krishna is allowing for the gopis' minds to be drawn to him is reflective of an eternal relationship that exists between a living entity and Lord Krishna. And Lord Krishna states it this way. This is how Lord Krishna puts it in Bhagavad Gita. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So just highlighting this eternal relationship that's there between Krishna and the living entities. And the Sanskrit for that, which is text 15:7 in Bhagavad Gita, is Mamai Vamso Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana Manaha Shastani Indriyani Prakriti Sthani Kashati. So that eternal relationship between Lord Krishna and the living entities is due to the fact that Lord Krishna and the individual identities of the Lord, meaning his primary expansions like Lord Rama, Lord Nrsimhadev, etc., they're always present in their individual identities, and Krishna's separated expansion, meaning all the other living entities, they're eternally present as servitors of him. So there's that eternal relationship. So the gopis, they're in the position of using their personal individuality, and considering that each individual has got independence, their minute independence, in a way that makes them liberated from any kind of interest whereby they'll be connecting their material senses to something that is of a more temporary nature. Because that was the verse that Lord Krishna was, or the statement he was making, that's very much connected to this topic of how the living entities are eternally connected to him. And then he highlights the particular aspect of the living entities that's there, that they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So this is a very significant factor in the existence of the living entity. So the thing that highlights the relationship of the gopis as living entities in relation to Krishna is they actually are free from this kind of interest that living entities have to connect their senses to something material. They don't have any interest in anything temporary. So it's, for them, that second portion of what Krishna is highlighting about living entities doesn't actually apply. They're not actually struggling with their six senses because they don't have that need to connect the senses to anything material. So you could say that's a freedom or being liberated. And as liberated beings, they know the joy of transcendental pleasure. So Srila Prabhupada quotes from Padma Purana in the particular purport that I'm highlighting this particular eternal relationship between Krishna and living entities, and then this problem that comes in of their struggle. So here's something of Srila Prabhupada talking about persons who are liberated and knowing something of transcendental pleasure. So from Padma Purana. The mystics derive unlimited transcendental pleasure from the absolute truth. And therefore, the supreme absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, is also known as Rama. So there's a whole category of mystics. And I didn't go into detail in this, but there are different mystical perfections, and they bring great joy because it's some kind of control over material elements. So, for instance, a yogi that's achieved mystical perfection may have the ability to just reach out his hand and touch the moon. Or in fact, actually be able to get anything he wants from any other part of the world just by the power of thought. So it's some mystical perfection that allows for control of the material elements. So there's a kind of joy in that one's not subject to struggling with the senses, but has got control, and even control over the material elements. So Srila Prabhupada also quotes from Srimad Bhagavatam 551, where again he's pointing to this transcendental pleasure. So he said, so this is Lord Rishabdev talking to his sons, and it highlights something else of the joy of transcendental pleasure, and something of the opposite too, which is the regular condition of living beings in their relationship with Krishna, that they're struggling with their senses. So this is Lord Rishabdev telling his sons, "My dear boys, of all the living entities who have accepted material bodies in this world, one who has been awarded the human form should not work day and night simply for sense gratification, which is available even for dogs and hogs that eat stool. One should engage in penance and austerity to attain the divine position of devotional service. By such activity, one's heart is purified, and when one attains this position, he attains eternal blissful life, which is transcendental to material happiness and which continues forever." So highlighting, Lord Rishabdev is highlighting breaking that connection with the senses, and the means for breaking, or the need for the senses to connect with something material, the means for breaking that connection is to engage in austerities. So you actually do something that the senses may not particularly want, that may in fact be a bit of a struggle, but it's for a higher purpose. And doing that brings one to this position of devotional service. So, one could say that actually, even if one has by good fortune come into being able to take up some service that's of a devotional nature, there is austerity involved. And that's the means for breaking that struggle that's there with the senses. So in fact, just by doing that, one's putting oneself into a position where there's eternal bliss, and one becomes transcendental even to regular happiness that comes from the contact of the senses with something material. So there's a statement made by Srila Prabhupada where he's commenting on these teachings of Lord Rishabdev. And this is what Srila Prabhupada says: "Human beings should voluntarily accept suffering in the form of austerities and penance in order to attain the divine life." So it's very much connected to how Lord Rishabdev's instructing his sons, the princes. Now, interestingly, the gopis, they have actually already completely purified their hearts. And because they have indeed attained eternal blissful life, they're actually in that position. So they're there. So as opposed to being liberated, and liberation takes these kind of forms, one can become one with the Lord, meaning emerge in his effulgence, One can live with the Lord. So these are all forms of liberation. You're free from that struggle. You're living with the Lord in the same place. You have the same features of the Lord. And we hear Uddhava is in that position of liberation. He's described as having the same features as Lord Krishna. Or one can be enjoying the same kind of opulences as the Lord. Or even one can be living as a companion of the Lord. Now, the gopis, as opposed to just being liberated, the particular characteristic that they have is that they've attained pure devotion to Lord Krishna. So in this position, the characteristic that's there is the satisfaction in discharging loving service to Lord Krishna. So it's not anymore, an austerity, because you're still not you're not struggling with the senses and what the senses want to do. That's why it's an austerity, or it's a penance. You have to put aside something, give up something in order to do something higher. In the case of the gopis, the particular characteristic they have, because they're actually in this blissful state of their relationship with Lord Krishna, they're actually satisfied. They're experiencing complete satisfaction in their discharge of their service to Lord Krishna. And Srila Rupa Goswami, in Nectar of Devotion, he lists 6 characteristics of pure devotional service. So, one hears this term pure devotional service, but here is how it's actually characterized. The first one is that pure devotional service brings immediate relief from all kinds of material distress. So there's no material distress whatsoever. So we're hearing here, there appears to be distress because they're separated from Krishna, but a characteristic of pure devotional service is that there's no material distress whatsoever. The second thing is that pure devotional service is the beginning of all auspiciousness. Means that everything is perfect and auspicious. It's in relation to Lord Krishna. So there's a sense of goodness, happiness. Everything's auspicious. Everything's in the right place at the right time. Pure devotional service automatically puts one in transcendental pleasure. So that's the constant. Experiencing constant transcendental pleasure. That's a characteristic of pure devotional service. So this is sort of painting the picture, because these are the characteristics of pure devotional service. So you get an idea of what's actually the state of the gopis. The fourth characteristic of pure devotional service is that it's rarely achieved. So that's why we're reading of the gopis and they're revered so highly, because this is rarely achieved. It's one of the characteristics of pure devotional service. The fifth characteristic of pure devotional service is that those in pure devotional service deride the concept of liberation. So they actually scoff at being liberated. They're not looking to be a companion of the Lord. They're not looking to have the features of the Lord. They're not looking to reside in the same place as the Lord. Because, there's some separation there. When you talk about that, one can live in the same country as a very famous person. Like my brother lives in England, so you could say he resides in the same place as the Queen. Yeah. And, but rather, it's this liberation is not so important. It's that satisfaction that automatically comes from performing some service in relation to Krishna. So that's the characteristic, the most important characteristic of pure devotional service. And the sixth characteristic of pure devotional service is it's the only means to attract Krishna. So even persons that are liberated doesn't mean that they're attracting Krishna. persons who are in this factual state of eternal spiritual life, being completely free of this struggle with wanting the senses, wanting to contact material objects, and just existing in their relationship with Lord Krishna, they're constantly attracting Lord Krishna. It's one of the characteristics of pure devotional service. Now, this particular characteristic of pure devotional service, that it's automatically putting one in a state of transcendental pleasure, it's described by Srila Prabhupada as a state that's producing a happiness that is transcendental and unlimited, that no other happiness can compare to it. So it's very difficult to actually understand in one sense. Happiness that goes on and on and on and on and on and on. It's very difficult to understand because we're accustomed to, you have a moment of happiness. Something wonderful happens. You have happiness and you may linger there for a while and you may bring your mind back to it occasionally, but you cannot remain in that state. But pure devotional service has a happiness that goes on and on and on and on and on and on. So this has some implications in terms of the gopis' receptiveness to the message given by Uddhava to date. Because Uddhava, just all the way up to now, until this very moment of what we're reading today, he had just said that all the methods in Scripture have as their purpose control of the mind. This was his conclusion. That's what I think yesterday was the final statement. So he's highlighting that facet that Lord Krishna has pointed out about living entities and their struggling to control the six senses, especially the mind. And Uddhava, yesterday, what we'd read, he comes to this point in his message to the gopis where he's actually saying that all the purposes of the Vedas is that one is drawn to this fact that one needs to control the mind. But taking into account what I've just read about the characteristics of being in the state of pure devotional service, what it means, we have to look at the implication of Uddhava delivering this message to the gopis. What's their response to it? And of course, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, having insight into their internal thought process, they have a particular mood where they're responding to Uddhava's presentation to them, and their thoughts are as follows. Listen. This is internal. Oh, Uddhava, by this news from Krishna, you have doubled our pain. Therefore, should we call the sender of this message ignorant of the proper time, place, and person? You have brought this burden of Brahma Jnana this far, but who will buy it in Vraja? Can the gopis, who have from birth been drinking the nectar of Krishna's beauty, now drink the bitter neem sap of Brahma Jnana? It is better that the women of this place give up their lives if only such an abominable thing is available as food. Better they die of starvation. So they consider everything that Uddhava has said right now as actually not in accord with their beings. And actually they compare it to having to drink some sort of bitter neem sap. So if anybody's ever used a neem stick for cleaning teeth, there's a certain bitterness in the neem. So they're comparing what Uddhava said, all the words he said, with his emphasis on controlling the mind as, it's like drinking bitter neem sap. And, here it is. I mean, is he being ridiculous? Has he got no understanding of, who he's addressing? Not meaning in a proud way, but that, it's out of sync with the time, the place, and what they're experiencing. And taking into account what we understand of the characteristics of pure devotional service and the actual state of constant transcendental happiness, for him to be saying, the purpose of the Vedas is, everything points to controlling the mind. And they raise a question. And again, their question is revealed, their thinking is revealed by Srila Vishwanath. So this is internal. He's revealing the gopis' thoughts. Now listen, you great fool. So they're not expressing this, but it's in the mind. Just listen. This Brahma Jnana, which is found in the leaf huts of the hearts of great saintly physicians, is the medicinal herb that can remedy or cure the disease of material existence. But can it cure the grave disease of Krishna Prema? After learning the science of medicine from Sandipani Muni, Krishna has taught you and then sent you to us with the herbal cure to relieve the great fever of Prema. You can now be our messenger, Uddhava, and take this medicine back to the sender. Drinking it, Krishna will extinguish his fever of Prema for us. Make sure no trace of fever remains. As for us, may our great fever of Prema remain for 100 births. So, if his words were the medicine, to extinguish the struggle, of being in material existence, they say, well, take this medicine back to Krishna. Maybe it will extinguish his state of pure devotional, transcendental bliss and love. But, for us, we actually will stay in this condition of Krishna Prema and may it stay with us for 100 births. So they want to remain in their position of pure devotional love for Krishna. So this Brahma Jnana that is referenced, in particular in reference to the mind, it's spoken of by Lord Krishna. And this is how Lord Krishna explains it for his words. For one who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, the mind will remain the greatest enemy. So, there's great validity to what Uddhava is saying, even though the gopis are scoffing, because it's very significant. One who's conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who's failed to do so, the mind will remain the greatest enemy. So it is extremely important who you're residing with internally, your mind, your friend or your enemy. Now, since the position by constitution of the living entity is to carry out the order of the superior, because remember, it's an eternal relationship the living entity has with the Supreme Lord, and actually it's a subservient position. So that in that subservient position, one is carrying out the order of the superior. Then there's a problem if one's mind cannot be controlled. Like there's a barely human person who comes to the temple to banging the door down to get something to eat, and one can see that it's impossible for that mind to actually follow any instruction. So one will say to the person, stand and wait here and you will get your plate. That the mind is so uncontrolled, the person will go and look for the most comfortable couch, and will then spread himself out on the couch. In that condition, that abysmal condition, he will feel free to do that. So that's truly, the mind is the greatest enemy. Can't even follow a single direction. So there's a problem if one's mind cannot be controlled. So then what is happening is that the mind is serving, or rather the problem is that one starts to serve whatever the mind is dictating. So for that fellow, I mean, one doesn't know the confused mind, but the mind is dictating comfort. Food is coming. Let me now regale myself on the most comfortable seat and spread myself out in comfort. I mean, completely out of sync with, the actual condition of the person, out of sync with the circumstance that the person's in, out of sync with the environment the person is in. So this is the problem. One starts to serve whatever the mind is dictating. So the mind may be dictating that one should be angry, and then one will serve that anger. One will think, quite right, mind, let me be angry. This person has passed a comment about me. Just see, this person is the most horrible human being in the world. This person has no sense of justice. This person is a lowly person. You start serving the anger in the mind. You feed it. So this is what happens if there's no attempt to control the mind. Or you may be serving, the mind is dictating to be greedy. So one may be serving that. Oh, yeah, it would be very nice to acquire the 14th garment. I actually only need 7, but I'll get a 15th one. So that, you're serving the mind. Now, or rather the greed that's in the mind. So for the practice of yoga, or in the practice of yoga, the paramatma in the heart has to be met. So this is for any yogic practice. Those persons that come to that point of mystic perfection, the actual practice of the yoga is that they meet paramatma in the heart. And then that they're able to follow the superior orders of paramatma. That's actually what's supposed to happen with any yogic practice. So quoting Srila Prabhupada's words, for one who takes to Krishna consciousness directly, perfect surrender to the dictation of the Lord follows automatically. It's automatic, just automatic if you directly take to devotional service. The Lord within the hearts is issuing instructions, and one is happily going along with the Lord's instructions. You understand what needs to be done in a particular situation at a particular time, or if you're a little bit out of touch, you're still willing to follow the dictation, so you may refer to somebody who's further on the path of Bhakti Yoga in order to get a clearer understanding of what actually is the right dictation from Paramatma. Sometimes one may not be in touch, but still one's willing to follow. Automatically one's willing, which makes sense because one's understood the relationship that oneself as the living entity has to the Supreme Lord. So one is accepting that subservient position. So in this text 34, Krishna is also implying something of his own mind. And this is Krishna's words. Again, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur giving some internal thinking of Krishna. You gopis are also extremely attractive to my eyes. And thus, since you are now far from my eyes, you remain near to my mind. So one can deduce that an object of attraction, if it's far from the mind, or rather, it's far from the mind when it's in front of one's eyes. You have it right there. So it's not in the mind necessarily because you're physically seeing it. So your sense of sight is contacting that desired object. So it won't necessarily be in the mind. So you could say it's far from the mind. And conversely, If it's only present in the mind, it means that it's not physically present in front of the eyes. So it will be in the mind when it's not physically there. You can't connect your sense of sight to the particular desired object. So this is Krishna's logic. He says, therefore, the mind is more important. It's more important to carry internally that object that, is very attractive to you. And that's why Krishna says to the gopis, or rather he's internally thinking, I desire that you remain close to my mind. May that be your desire as well. So this is Krishna's internal thinking. His preference is that he keeps the gopis within his mind. So if they're not visible to him, he's far away, he thinks that's perfectly fine because it means he's carrying them in his mind. So he actually prays that they also have the same desire, that they carry him in their minds. And in text 35, this observation that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is pointing out of Krishna's logic, it takes into account such feelings that are present in the heart versus seen with the eyes. And Srila Vishwanath says that there's, in this verse, there was the usage of the word shav, which usually means and. And he points out that this example holds true for both men and women. So it's not like, that woman will carry their beloved in their minds when they're far from their beloved, but it applies to men too. So both sides. And that's what's said in text 35, which I'll just read again. When her lover is far away, a woman thinks of him more than when he is present before her. But Srila Vishwanath's pointing out it happens with both sexes. It doesn't alter that particular component of the relationship that happens with a desirable object. It remains in the mind when the desirable object is not present. And it's the same for men and women. So it's mentioned in the purport, Krishna is bringing the gopis closer to him on the spiritual platform. He wants them. He's expressed it, or that internal thinking was, he's desiring that they have that desire to carry him in their minds. So he's actually bringing them closer to him by having them carry him in their minds. So this means that they're coming closer to him on the spiritual platform. Just by virtue of the fact that he, as the desirable object, has gone far away from them. So it's in this sense that one can say this position of pure devotion, there's eternal blissful life, which remains at all times and forever. So Krishna is not present, but one carries Krishna in the mind. So that's why it has that characteristic of constant happiness, transcendental happiness, because one can carry Krishna in the mind. So it's clear that bhakti, where that's covered by other desires, where there's jnana, some sort of looking for knowledge, or karma, doing some sort of activities for a result, it doesn't have full strength. So I'm going to end on the note of Srila Jiva Goswami. Srila Jiva Goswami puts it this way. One who has unflinching devotion, Uttama Bhakti, must have all the good qualities of the demigods, and contrarily, one who is not a devotee of the Lord must be hovering in the darkness of mental speculation and thus must be engaged in material impermanence, which makes sense. You're engaged in material impermanence. So anything you're attracted to, it's going to be impermanent. You can't stay with it for too long. But on the spiritual plane, you can stay with Krishna eternally. And by contrast, the definition of pure bhakti is exemplified by the gopis. So the highest bhakti is defined as continuous service or emotions directed towards Krishna. his expansion or forms of others related to him with a pleasing attitude towards Krishna. And I'm quoting from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, so this is Srila Jiva Goswami speaking. His expansion forms or others related to him with a pleasing attitude towards Krishna. It should be devoid of desires other than the desire to please Krishna and unobstructed by impersonal jnana, the materialistic rituals of karma and other unfavorable acts. So the gopis exemplify that. So I'm ending on that note. Any thought on this topic?
You mentioned that pure devotional service was the special qualification of the gopis. And in one sense, come from the position of those who achieve the different types of liberation in comparison to the gopis. Then, we're thinking there's certain Vaikuntha basis that there's no doubt of their, pure devotional service, such as Narada Muni, Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya and Vijay. These are all Vaikuntha basis. And they're celebrated as pure devotees, like that. So if you can, then draw that comparison that there's persons, there's living entities as devotees who are who have that type of liberation or living, having the same form of the Lord, and like Jaya and Vijay have the same form of the Lord, or being companions of the Lord, or living in the same type of opulence of the Lord, like that. So how they also have that quality of pure devotional service.
Yes, that's an interesting question, because it would, from what I said, it would sort of almost imply that a liberated person, and that was the breakdown by Srila Rupa Goswami of a liberated person being a companion of the Lord, living in the same place as the Lord, having the same features as the Lord, that they may not be in the same position as the gopis, because the gopis are particularly exemplifying pure devotional service, and that the characteristics of pure devotional service is that continuous transcendental pleasure, that they're experiencing at least one of those characteristics. And it's interesting because you're bringing up the point that there's a whole category of devotees that are Vaikuntha devotees, so that these devotees are also celebrated as having pure devotional service. So it would imply that they also are characterized, because they're carrying pure devotional service, they're also characterized as having devotion that puts them into a position of continuous transcendental happiness, particularly, and yet we're hearing that the Uddhava is being sent to observe the particularly intimate relationship that the gopis have to Lord Krishna. And I think what emerged from me through thinking about this more deeply and trying to put this presentation together was that the gopis carrying Krishna within their minds, which is this presentation, is so completely real and so much a part of their being that the mind doesn't move from there at all at any time. And they're in that state of constant interaction with, meditation upon Lord Krishna. And it's a kind of intimacy that I suppose is the difference. So indeed, the Vaikuntha devotees have to have the same characteristics of transcendental happiness, at least, and all the various other ones that I'd read that characterize somebody carrying pure devotion, but particularly that intimate connection of, they're actually in constant dialogue with Lord Krishna. That's really the truth of the matter. So he's not even present, but they're dialoguing constantly. It's like without ceasing. And I guess it's that extreme intimacy of the transcendental pleasure and connection that is very unique to them. That he's carried in, Lord Krishna is carried in their minds. That it's not like a memory of, it's a reality of. He's constantly with them. They're constantly dialoguing with him. They're constantly, even in recall, he's present with them. It's a ongoing reality. The object is not distant from them. The object is, that object of attraction is constantly present with them. That's the best way I can describe it, because Uddhava is actually discovering that.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's a very good explanation. It's just what emerged from this particular section that we're on.
Yeah, you mentioned it in the class, the Srila Rupa Goswami, when it's mixed with jnana and karma. And in the case of Uddhava, giving all this Brahma Gyan, and the gopis, just like, it's like, it's foolish, I mean, they consider it, why are you telling us this? It's very distasteful. But for the Vaikuntha Vasis, the Dwarka Vasis, Brahma Gyan, their devotion, their pure devotion had that feature. So therefore, they can always see the Lord in awe and reverence. But the gopis, their devotion, their pure devotional service is devoid of Brahma Gyan, because they just reject it. It's just plain love, intimate love with Krishna. And that's what makes it, the most exalted and unique, and the unique contribution that we hear, Uddhava just congratulating you. You have given the most unique contribution to the whole world by showing your pure devotional service that is devoid of all that. There's no mix. So Narada Muni and Prahlad Maharaj and Uddhava, they all have pure devotional service, but is with the full understanding of, the Gyan. And therefore, how can you even, think that you can chastise Krishna or poke Krishna or things like that, It's impossible.
Yeah, it's that intimacy. Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful class. Um, there was so much. There was a lot because as soon as we even read 34, I was like, wow, um, I could go all day with this one. Like, how are we gonna even read a second one? And then we read the 35, and I was like, okay, it goes hand in hand, so it makes sense. Um, so I wrote a bunch of notes, and to just actually piggyback on this last one, because that just blew my mind. I'm like, well, if Narada Muni and Prahlad isn't with gopis, like and the only thing that really pacified me is, as far as I know, pure devotion. That's the goal of pure devotion isn't to get there; it's to serve Krishna. So if they're out serving and that's the goal, then they're doing it. So it's not to get to the gopis per se; it's to serve him wherever he wants, or what best suits them. So I'm like, okay, I feel better now. Look, that's cool. And as far as my notes, let's see. There was one of the regulations that I didn't quite hear. I think it was the fourth characteristic of devotional service. What was it?
Pure devotional service is rarely achieved.
Oh, is rarely achieved. So it must have been the fifth one.
Those in pure devotional service deride the concept of liberation.
That's it. So deride. What is the context of deride here?
What is the concept of liberation?
The context.
The context. Oh, the context is, these are just characteristics of persons in that pure state of devotional service, that they're actually, and this is particularly the gopis, they're not actually favoring this idea of being liberated from what I described, that's struggle, that's part of the living entity where the senses need to contact the material object for pleasure. Mm-hmm. So being liberated means that you actually, as a living entity, you're not caught up in that struggle anymore. Your senses are not trying to contact the object that gives you pleasure. Rather, you're free from that, and now you're in a position where you actually live in the same place as the Lord. You even start to get the same features, or you may have the same features of the Lord. In fact, you may even be a companion to the Lord. And Uddhava was a lot in this position, liberated. So the gopis, in their purity, their minds being completely pure, and as Subal was reiterating, there isn't that connection with the knowledge part, the jnana part, and they're not trying to do some material activity or still use their senses in some material way. That doesn't even exist. Mm-hmm. So for them, they can scoff at this idea of becoming liberated from material existence, or, the struggle of the senses with contact with the material world. They can scoff at it because they're so far from it. They're in a state of constant, ongoing transcendental happiness. Doesn't break. Even with them, not having Krishna present, it doesn't break. Their transcendental happiness is equally there. It's ongoing, never ceasing. So they can laugh. Oh, yeah. Oh.
I see. Thank you for that clarity. No, there was just a bunch of other really cool concepts that you brought that I just want to mention again. The mystical perfection, that was really cool. The continuous service or emotion towards Krishna, that's a big one. Continuous service or emotions towards Krishna, like the gopis and how they were feeling, and how like they were kind of, not always polite, even if it's in their head. I think that's so cool because it's like a direct relation to or reflection, I should say, of like things we see here with like relationships between two people. And, like the only difference is that like here is Krishna consciousness. It's, it's the emotions towards Krishna. So I just find it just amazing, that the reflections are all here. You can see it in any kind of moment, even like so this kind of stuff. So it's
Yes.
quite beautiful.
Well, thank you that you noticed that one and highlighted it. Yes, I agree. It's extraordinary.
Extraordinary. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Wow, there's just so many things. What a awesome class. And I'm very appreciative of the work that you put into bringing that information to us.
Thank you, Bhagavatam.
It's like I don't have so much of a question as a thought that's coming to me right now, where it's kind of a question too. So it's like they say higher than worship of Krishna is worship of the Vaishnava, right? Like Srila Prabhupada, right? So even though the gopis, their love is so high for Krishna, it feels like we have such an opportunity now to worship a Vaishnava, which is even higher. And by saying, okay, Srila Prabhupada, what is your wishes? I'm kind of like this with everything else, what can I do for you? How may I worship you? And the thought is like, I just feel like books, like in the moment, get a book table right out here will be really awesome to have. We have such a nice patio and so many nice things. Prabhupada would be so happy. As people walk past, they be able to see us and get books and stuff right here. And it was just a thought. It feels like very emotional.
Oh, thank you, Vaishnava Nanda. Yes, that's just to add to that, the gopis are in fact serving Vaishnavas, so to speak. They make every conceivable arrangement for Srimati Radharani. Every conceivable arrangement, because that they believe will please Krishna. So they have that great love, but they help Srimati Radharani, to do whatever arrangement to enhance the loving affairs of Srimati Radharani and Krishna. So it's that, yeah. So yes, indeed, to perform some service for a Vaishnava is very pleasing to Lord Krishna, and it actually breaks down any of those impediments that are in the mind. Yeah. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.